I didn't come into Parliament to spend my time working on the future of the European Union. It's not what my constituents, when they elected me first in 2010, intended me to spend my time on either. They wanted me to concentrate on their living standards, their security, the future for their children and grandchildren, and a better planet for the future of our world. But actually, all of these things are encompassed in the decision we make tonight about whether or not we accept the deal that is before us, and about our commitment to our ongoing relationship with our European Union neighbours. And I will not vote for a deal that will make my constituents poorer, that will make them less secure, that will mean that we have less influence in decisions that are taken that will affect them, and that will reduce our standing, our highly respected and highly regarded standing in the world. I am distressed, as all honourable members are, at the divisions that this Brexit story has revealed, opened up in our country. But our duty now is to concentrate on healing them. And I do not believe it will ever be possible to do that if we deliberately make our country poorer and more unstable and less influential than it would otherwise have been. We need to concentrate on building a positive, prosperous, powerful future for this nation. Voting to leave the EU and voting for the Prime Minister's way of leaving tonight will not enable us to do so.
That woman!
Mr. Speaker, mine is the constituency that voted more than any other to leave the European Union in 2016. If we do not give back control of our laws, borders and money, it will be hard to say that this country is a democracy. The people in 2016 heard all the apocalyptic predictions that we now hear about WTO, and they made a choice. And in part, the country did that because Parliament had, rightly or wrongly, come to be seen as out of touch with the people on a host of issues. If we don't deliver what the people voted for, we will prove them right, and we will damage a democracy further in which people already lack faith. So how do we get there? It is clear that this House does not want to back a no-deal departure. It has already been clear that people on both sides of this House will vote to stop it. So I say to those of my constituents who have called me a traitor and worse, that when I vote with the Prime Minister tonight, I do so because I am committed to Brexit, and voting against this deal puts winds in the sails of those who seek to stop it. Those people have had too much success already. Voting against this deal will not bring about a harder Brexit. It will bolster this House's dangerous attempts to undermine it. Those who say no deal is in law and will happen, I say to them, this House will rewrite that law. I am voting tonight for the only way out of this conundrum, a necessary gateway, however painful it might be. There is a risk that we get stuck in the backstop, but it is now smaller than the risk of not leaving at all. We in Parliament are better than letting the people down. We deserve to get on with it, to deliver this Brexit, and we should, like it or not in many cases, support this deal tonight.
I am going to be incredibly parochial. In the general election of 2017, my personal manifesto to the voters of North Dorset said, and I quote, "I am working for a Brexit right for North Dorset that will support business, protect jobs and workers' rights, promote local farming, safeguard the environment and give opportunities for our young." Having reviewed the deal, I am confident that it meets those commitments and the referendum decision to leave. We live, as we know, in a representative democracy where the voters of North Dorset send me to Westminster to exercise my judgment and support the policies of the Conservative government. I do not, and none of us do, possess the judgment of Solomon. All I can try and do is to assure them that I am trying to do my best for them and for our country. And I am conscious that in so doing, I will not please everyone, but I do not think that is the purpose of politics. I'm a Democrat. I voted Remain and my side lost. The referendum was not, as we know, our finest hour. The majority of the House has made clear that it would support the decision and Parliament would deliver it. I maintain that view. A second referendum is fool's gold. Our country's use of referenda is on constitutional issues, and Brexit is now an issue of domestic policy. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has worked, if I may say so, her fingers to the bone to get this deal right. It has my full and unequivocal support. To deliver Brexit, to maintain and build the faith in our democracy, this House should stop the posturing and support my right honourable friend in the lobby tonight.
Peter Bottomley.
The UK is to leave the EU. That decision was taken 2 years ago. The question is whether we crash out or support the withdrawal agreement, be followed by the period of transition and the future arrangements on trade and relationships. Assuming we're not trying to reverse the referendum, and there isn't a majority, I think, either in the country or in the House for that, the majority of us support the Prime Minister's deal. The majority of Conservative supporters support that. I suspect the majority of Labour supporters support that. And other parties, given a choice, including Northern Ireland, would as well. Our responsibility is to find where there's an overlap between what's possible and what's right. I believe that the negotiated agreement on withdrawal is that position. For the opposition to be reasonably polite, they seem to resemble members of the Scarabaei family who are upside down, pushing in the wrong direction, don't quite know where they're going. If the choice for the country is between chaos and compromise, I think this agreement is the right way of being sensible, and I back the plan in the national interest.
Thank you. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has been a vitally important debate for the future of our country and our future relationship with the European Union, following the decision of the people in the 2016 referendum. The debate today is the culmination of one of the most chaotic and extraordinary parliamentary processes I've ever experienced in my 35 years as a member of this House. Parliament has held the government in contempt for the first time ever for failing to publish their legal advice. Then, for the first time in a generation or more, on the 10th of December, a government failed to move its own business in the House. The government has been defeated on a vote in its own finance bill for the first time since the 1970s. The Prime Minister opened the debate on her deal more than 1 month ago, a debate that was due to end on the 11th of December, but she pulled it in a panic. As she herself conceded, it would have been rejected by a significant margin. She has run down the clock in a cynical attempt to strong-arm members into backing her deal. Despite her promises, she's failed to negotiate any changes to her deal with Europe. No wonder the Prime Minister has suddenly discovered the importance of trade unions. She voted to clip their wings in the 2016 Trade Union Act, and she's utterly failed to convince them she has anything to offer Britain's workforce. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the heart of the matter. The Prime Minister has treated Brexit as a matter for the Conservative Party rather than the good of the country. But she's failed to win over even her own party. Many Conservative members who voted Remain are opposed to this deal, as are dozens of Conservative members who voted Leave. After losing her majority in the 2017 general election, the Prime Minister could have engaged with members across this House. She could have listened to the voices of trade unions. And if she had been listening, both businesses and trade unions would have told her they wanted a comprehensive and permanent customs union to secure jobs and trade. The decision to rule out a new customs union with a British say and the lack of certainty in the deal risks business investment being deferred on an even greater scale, threatening jobs and threatening living standards. Or even worse, it risks many companies relocating abroad, taking jobs and investment with them. Mr. Speaker, many workers know exactly this situation because they are facing this reality now. Their jobs are at risk, and they know their jobs are at risk. Both the First Ministers of Wales and Scotland have also made clear to the Prime Minister their support for a customs union to protect jobs and the economy. This deal fails to provide any certainty about future trade. It fails to guarantee our participation in European agencies and initiatives. Losing this cooperation undermines our security, denies our citizens opportunity and damages our industries. Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement is, in short, a reckless leap in the dark. It takes this country no closer to understanding our post-Brexit future, and neither does the future partnership document. Under this deal, in December 2020, we will be faced with a choice: either pay more and extend the transition period, or lock us into the backstop. At that point, the UK would be over a barrel. We would have left the EU, have lost the UK rebate, and be forced to pay whatever was demanded. Alternatively, the backstop would come into force, an arrangement with which there is no time limit or endpoint. It locks Britain into a deal from which it cannot leave without the agreement of the EU. And as my friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, has pointed out on so many occasions, this is unprecedented in British history. The last 2 years gives us no confidence that this government can do a deal in under 2 years. So at some point before December 2020, the focus would then inevitably shift from negotiations on the future relationship to negotiations on an extension to the transition period, including negotiations on what further payments we should make to the European Union. The vague partnership document says, and I quote, "It can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes as well as checks and controls." That doesn't show to me any clarity whatsoever in that document. And there is not even any mention of the famed frictionless trade that was promised in the Chequers proposals. The former Brexit Secretary, that's one of the former Brexit Secretaries, promised a detailed, precise and substantive document. The government spectacularly failed to deliver it. So, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm this, that Labour will vote against this deal tonight. And, Mr. Speaker, Labour will vote against it because it's a bad deal for this country. And as we have heard over the past week, members in all parties, including many in the Conservative Party, will join us in rejecting this botched and damaging deal. And I welcome the fact there is a clear majority to reject any no-deal outcome. The amendment to the Finance Bill last week demonstrated the will of the House on rejecting the danger, and it is a danger, of a no-deal outcome that would cause such chaos to so many people across this country. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough for the House to vote against the deal before us and against no deal. We also have to be for something. So, Mr. Speaker, So, Mr. Speaker, in the coming days, it is vital that this House has the opportunity to debate and vote on the way forward, to consider all the options available. The overwhelming majority of the House voted to respect the result of the referendum and therefore voted to trigger Article 50. So I say this to our negotiating partners in the European Union. If Parliament votes down this deal, then reopening negotiations should not and cannot be ruled out. We understand why, after 2 frustrating years of negotiations, this I'm saying to the European Union, you would want this resolved. But this Parliament, our Parliament here, has only one duty: to represent the interests of the people of this country. And the deal negotiated by the government does not meet the needs of the people of this country. The people of Britain, including many European Union nationals who have made their lives here, these are people who have contributed to our country, have contributed to our economy and to our public services, including our National Health Service. And those people are now anxious and have no faith in this government to manage the process of settled status fairly or efficiently. And the early pilots of the scheme are very far from encouraging. The Prime Minister claimed that this is a good deal. And so confident was she of that she refused to publish the government's legal advice. But her government's own economic assessment clearly tells us it is a bad deal. It's a product, Mr. Speaker, of 2 years of botched negotiations, in which the government spent more time arguing with itself and in its own cabinet than it did in negotiating with the European Union. It's not only on Brexit that they have failed. Under this government, Mr. Speaker, more people are living in poverty, including... Mr. Speaker, I'm talking of the poverty of 500,000 more children who've been moved into poverty while this government's been in office. I'm also talking of those that have been forced into rough sleeping and homelessness, which has risen every year. Too many people are stuck in low-paid and insecure work. Too many people are struggling to make ends meet and falling deeper and deeper into personal debt on credit cards and loan sharks. Nothing in this Brexit deal and nothing on offer from this government will solve that. That is why Labour believes that a general election would be the best outcome for the country. If this deal is rejected tonight, we need, Mr. Speaker, to keep in mind that the vast majority of the people of this country don't think of themselves as Remainers or Leavers. Whether they voted Leave or Remain 2.5 years ago, they, all of them, are concerned about their future, and it's their concerns this House must be able to answer and meet. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that tonight this House votes down this deal, and then we move to a general election. So the people, Mr. Speaker, so the people...
Order. Nobody's going to shout the right honourable gentleman down, just as nobody will shout the Prime Minister down. All they're doing, by causing me to intervene, is taking time away. Not necessary, rather foolish, thoroughly counterproductive. Jeremy Corbyn.
So, Mr. Speaker, the people need to be able to take back control, and a general election would give them the opportunity to decide who their MPs were, who their government was, and who was negotiating on their behalf. And it would give that new government a mandate, and the mandate that is needed to break the deadlock that has been brought to this House by this government. But first, Mr. Speaker, I ask this of the House. Vote against this deal. Vote against this deal because we've had a very long and very detailed debate in this House. More members have spoken in this debate than almost any other debate I can remember. They've given a heartfelt analysis of this deal, and a very large number have said why they will vote against this deal. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, this deal is bad for our economy, a bad deal for our democracy, and a bad deal for this country. I ask the House tonight to do the right thing. Reject this deal. Reject this deal because of the harm it would do, and show that we as MPs are speaking up for the people that we represent, who recognise this deal is dangerous for this country and bad for them, their living standards, and for our collective future.
Mr. Speaker, this debate has lasted some 8 days, over 54 hours, with speeches of powerful sincerity from over 200 honourable and right honourable members. It has been historic for our Parliament and for our country. We have heard contributions from every perspective, looking at all aspects of this complex and vital question. We've seen this House at its most passionate and vigorous, and I thank everyone who has contributed. No one watching this debate can be in any doubt about the strength of this House of Commons as the fulcrum of our democracy. This is a debate about our economy and security, the livelihoods of our constituents, and the future for our children and for generations to come. It goes to the heart of our Constitution, and no one should forget that it is a democratic process that has got us to where we are today. In 2015, my party stood on an election manifesto that had as a centrepiece the promise of an in-out referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union. The British people responded by electing a Conservative government to follow through on that promise. That is what we did when this House voted overwhelmingly to hold the referendum and put the choice in the hands of the British people. Indeed, 470 current members voted in favour of it, and only 32 opposed it. That campaign was keenly fought. It caught the public imagination like few campaigns before it. Turnout was 72%, higher than for any national poll for a quarter of a century. And while not overwhelming, the result was clear and it was decisive. Something this House accepted when we voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50. 436 current members voted to do so, only 85 opposed. Parliament gave the people a choice. We set the clock ticking on our departure. And tonight, we will determine whether we move forward with a withdrawal agreement that honours the vote and sets us on course for a better future. The responsibility of each and every one of us at this moment is profound, for this is an historic decision that will set the future of our country for generations. So what are the alternatives that present themselves? First, we could decide it's all too difficult and give up, either by revoking Article 50 or passing the back buck to the British people in a second referendum. But I believe we have a duty to deliver on the democratic decision of the British people, and to do so in a way that brings our country together. A second referendum would lead instead to further division. There'd be no agreement to the question, let alone the answer. It would say to the people we were elected to serve that we were unwilling to do what they had instructed. Now, the second possible outcome is that we leave on the 29th of March without a deal. But I don't believe that's what the British people voted for, because they were told that if they voted to leave, they could still expect a good trading relationship with the European Union. And neither would it be the best outcome. Our deal delivers certainty for businesses, with a time-limited implementation period to prepare for the new arrangements of the future relationship. No deal means no implementation period. Our deal protects the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU, so they can carry on their lives as before. No deal means no reciprocal agreement to protect those citizens' rights. Our deal delivers the deepest security partnership in the EU's history, so our police and security services can continue to work together with their European partners to keep all our people safe. No deal means no such security partnership. And our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious, that is...
I said earlier it was becoming really rather a noisy and unseemly atmosphere, and that has now resumed. It must stop. The Prime Minister must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious than anything they have ever entered into with a third country. It will give us the benefits of trading with the European Union and the ability to forge new trade deals in our own right. No deal means those new trade deals come at the expense of a trade deal with Europe, not in addition to it. So while it is categorically wrong to suggest that our country could not ultimately make a success of no deal, it is equally wrong to suggest that this is the best outcome. Now, third, there is the path advocated by the Leader of the Opposition, and we've heard it again, of calling a general election. But today's vote is not about what's best for the Leader of the Opposition. It is about what is best for the country. And at the end of a general election, whatever the result, the choices facing us will not have changed. It will still be no Brexit, leaving with no deal, or leaving with a deal. And there's no guarantee that an election would make the parliamentary arithmetic any easier. All it would gain is 2 more months of uncertainty and division. In 2017, the two main parties both stood on manifestos that pledged to deliver the result of the referendum. They got over 80% of the vote. People had the opportunity to vote for a second referendum by supporting the Liberal Democrats in 2017. Just 7% of voters did so. It is the job of Parliament to deliver on the promises made at the last election, not to be seeking a new one. Now, some suggest there's a fourth option, to agree that we should leave with a deal on the 29th of March, but to vote this deal down in the hope of going back to Brussels again and negotiating an alternative deal. But no such alternative deal exists. The political declaration sets the framework for the future relationship, and the next phase of negotiations will be our chance to shape that relationship. But we cannot begin those talks unless or until we agree the terms of our withdrawal. And the European Union will not agree to any other deal for that withdrawal. So, having ruled out all of these options, we're left with one: to vote for this deal tonight. One that delivers on the core tenets of Brexit, taking back control of our borders, laws, money, trade and fisheries, but in a way that protects jobs, ensures our security and honours the integrity of our United Kingdom. One that strikes a fair balance between the hopes and desires of all our fellow citizens, those who voted to leave and those who voted to stay in. And if we leave with the deal I'm proposing, I believe we can lay the foundations from which to build a better Britain. And as Prime Minister, I would not stand at this dispatch box and recommend a course of action that I do not believe is in the best interests of our country and our future. And there are differences in this House today, but I believe we can come together as we go forwards. And let me reassure anyone who's in any doubt whatsoever, the government will work harder at taking Parliament with us. And as we move on to the next phase of negotiations, we will be looking to work with Parliament to seek that consensus. But, Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the most contentious element of our deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol.
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, knows that what concerns many of us is the possibility of the permanent nature of the Northern Ireland backstop. May I refer her to my Amendment B on the order paper, which sets a deadline for that backstop, and may I ask her what is the attitude of the government to my amendment?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for the question he's asked and for the work that he has been doing to try to find a way through on this particular issue. And I know he's spent a long time consulting with international lawyers on this issue. The government isn't able to accept the amendment that has been selected, that my right honourable friend has put down that has been selected tonight, because we have a different opinion and a different interpretation of the Vienna Convention. But I note that my right honourable friend has put down an alternative proposals in relation to this issue. The government is willing to look at creative solutions and will be happy to carry on working with my right honourable friend in relation to that particular issue. I said I would turn to the Northern Ireland.
Order. The House must calm itself. Zen. Restraint. Patience. Hear the Prime Minister.
I set out the government's position in detail on my statement in my statement yesterday, so I'm not going to go over it again. But the key thing to remember is this isn't a commitment we're making to the European Union. It's a commitment to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland that they will be able to carry on living their lives as they do today. It's about saying that whatever happens when we leave the EU, we will honour the Belfast Agreement. Its success has been built on allowing people from both communities in Northern Ireland to feel that their identities are respected under the principle of consent. For many people in Northern Ireland, that means having a seamless land border between the UK and Ireland, which is also essential for their economy. For others, that means fully respecting the fact that Northern Ireland is an intrinsic part of the United Kingdom. No one wants to see the return of a hard border, and as a proud unionist, I share the concerns of members who are determined that we do not undermine the strength of our United Kingdom. But it is not enough simply to make these assertions. We have to put in place arrangements that deliver those ends. And it's not just as simple as some would like it to be. So, as Prime Minister for the whole UK, it's my duty to provide a solution that works for the people of Northern Ireland. The answer lies in agreeing our future economic relationship, but we need an insurance policy to guarantee there will be no hard border if that future relationship is not in place by the end of the implementation period. I'll give way to the Leader of the Democratic Union.
Very grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. And would she agree that whatever one's view on this withdrawal agreement and whatever arguments that people deploy, that we should not be using the peace or the political process in Northern Ireland as arguments for voting for this deal or voting against it? Would she agree that that is completely and utterly out of order? Make that clear to all of our Cabinet colleagues as well.
To the right honourable gentleman, I think everybody across this House is committed to ensuring that we maintain the arrangements of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, that we also ensure that we maintain the many benefits that have come from the peace process in Northern Ireland. And that should not be disrupted, and that should not be affected in any sense. But I also say that whatever future relationship is going to be negotiated or people want to see being negotiated, that insurance policy is essential. Any of the other proposals, Canada, Norway, any number of variations of those models, all of them require the insurance policy, and that is the so-called backstop. And no backstop simply means no deal now and for the foreseeable future. And I don't want to see anybody being able to exploit no deal and bringing doubt about the future of our union as a result of that. And let's remember, if I may say to this House, what the withdrawal agreement does deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. An implementation period, certainty for businesses. Protection of citizens' rights, certainty to thousands of families. No hard border, unfettered access to British and EU markets. Protection of the single electricity market across the island of Ireland, securing energy supply in Northern Ireland. Continued security cooperation with our European allies that the police service of Northern Ireland say is essential, and above all, the protection of the historic Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The deal we have puts our union first. Now, let me turn to the contribution of the Leader of the Opposition. Characteristic of his whole approach to Brexit, long on criticism and short on coherence. He's claimed that he'll be able to renegotiate the deal in a matter of weeks, get a drastically different outcome, and despite the European Union making clear that's impossible. But everything he does is designed to avoid taking any difficult decisions, saying one thing to one group and another thing to another. In the general election, he said in his manifesto, freedom of movement will end. On Sunday, he said, I'm not against the free movement of people. When asked about Brexit in a German newspaper, he said, we can't stop it. The referendum took place. Article 50 has been triggered. In his speech at Wakefield last week, and again this evening, he said a second referendum was an option on the table. He says Labour would run an independent trade policy, but he wants to join the customs union. He says he's opposed to no deal, but he says he's opposed to withdrawal agreement and the backstop without which there is no deal. So the question is, what is his position? Because he has failed in his responsibility to provide a credible alternative to the government of the day by pursuing from the start a cynical course designed to serve his own political interest and not the national interest. He has forfeited the right to demand loyalty from those of his MPs who take a more pragmatic view, because he doesn't care whether we leave or not, with a deal or not, as long as he can maximise disruption and uncertainty and the likelihood of a general election. And I hope that members opposite, who faithfully pledged to their constituents that they would respect the result of the referendum, that they think carefully before voting against a deal which delivers Brexit. And I hope that those who fear leaving without a deal, whose constituents rely on manufacturing jobs, think very carefully about rejecting a deal that is the only guaranteed way to take no deal off the table. Mr. Speaker, this is the most significant vote that any of us will ever be part of in our political careers. After all the debate, all the disagreement, all the division, the time has now come for all of us in this House to make a decision that will define our country for decades to come, a decision that will determine the future for our constituents, their children and their grandchildren, a decision that each of us will have to justify and live with for many years to come. We know the consequences of voting for this deal. They are laid out in black and white in the pages of the withdrawal agreement. But no one who votes against this deal will be able to tell their constituents what real-world outcome they voted for, because a vote against this deal is a vote for nothing more than uncertainty, division and the very real risk of no deal.
I'm very grateful for the Prime Minister for giving way. Prime Minister, on any of the analysis of Brexit, economic growth will be lower than staying in the European Union. Will the Prime Minister not realise, on the basis of the knowledge and on the fact that people are going to lose opportunities as a consequence of Brexit, the alternative is to extend Article 50, go back, give the people the say. Let's act in all our interests on the basis of the information that we now have.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, Parliament gave the British people a choice. Parliament, the government of the time, all parties, all those campaigning in that referendum were absolutely clear that whatever the decision of that referendum, it would be respected by government and by Parliament. And I believe that we have a duty to deliver on that referendum vote, and to do so in a way that does protect people's jobs and protects our security and protects our union. A vote against this deal is a vote for nothing more than uncertainty, division, and the very real risk of no deal or no Brexit at all. And it doesn't have to be that way. Tonight we can choose certainty over uncertainty. We can choose unity over division. We can choose to deliver on our promise to the British people, not break that promise and endanger trust in politics for a generation. Because as members of Parliament, we have a duty to serve not our own self-interest nor that of our parties, but the people we were elected to represent. It is the people of this country that we were sent here to serve. The people of this country who queued up at polling stations, who cast their ballots so they might put their faith in us. It is the people of this country who entrusted us with the sacred right to build for them and their children and grandchildren the brighter future they expect and deserve. And if we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, then tomorrow we can begin to build that future together. If we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, we can build a country that works for everyone. Together we can show the people we serve that their voices have been heard, that their trust was not misplaced, that our politics can and does deliver, that politicians can rise above our differences and come together to do what the people asked of us. That is the test history has set for us today. It will determine the future of our country for generations. We each have a solemn responsibility to deliver Brexit and take this country forward. And with my whole heart, I call on this House to discharge that responsibility together, and I commend this motion to the House.
Under the order of the House of the 4th of December and the 9th of January, I must now put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the European Union withdrawal motion. As I explained the sequence earlier, it should now be familiar to colleagues. I begin by inviting Jeremy Corbyn, the Leader of the Opposition, to move Amendment A.
Mr. Speaker.
Not moved. I turn now to the second of the amendments, that in the name of the Leader of the Scottish National Party, Mr Ian Blackford, Amendment K.
Not moved, Mr. Speaker.
Moved. Thank you. I turn to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Gainsborough, to move, if he so wishes, Amendment B.
In view of the positive response from the PM, not moved.
Moved. Very well. And finally, I invite Mr John Barron to move Amendment F.
I beg to move. Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the amendment in the name of the honourable gentleman and of others, Amendment F, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think think the noes have it. No? Is the honourable gentleman persisting? No? Persistence, order. I know what I'm doing. The key point is persistence. If the honourable order. If the honourable gentleman wishes to press his amendment, he is entitled to do so. Oh, yes, he is. Oh, yes, he is. I'll be the judge of that. The question is that the amendment be made. I'll say it once more. As many as that have been, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
Well, welcome to BBC Parliament's coverage of the critical series of Commons votes that will determine what happens next with Brexit. And welcome to viewers in the US on C-SPAN. With me is the constitutional expert Dr. Ruth Fox of the Hansard Society think tank. MPs have just started voting. It's been in a slightly surprising way. There was an expectation that big amendments from the Labour Party and the Scottish National Party were going to be pressed to a vote, but they've decided not to do that this evening. They apparently want a clean vote directly on the Prime Minister's deal, uncluttered by any amendments. It's been a long and formidable debate, 50-plus hours stretching well back into last week, building on a previous abortive debate which was unexpectedly suspended before Christmas. And in the next half an hour or so, we'll know whether the Prime Minister has won approval for her divorce deal from the EU and the declaration about the future relationship, or whether the apparent vast majority against it in the Commons has held together and voted her down. Ruth Fox, I suppose the thing that we've got to look at here is by how much. There's some talk that if the Prime Minister only just loses her deal, that is almost a victory for the government, given the odds apparently ranged against them earlier.
Well, yes, Mark. I mean, if we look at back in December when the government pulled this vote, there was talk that they might lose by 200, possibly more. In terms of historic levels that the government will be looking at, the biggest government defeat on a whipped vote, courtesy of our colleague Professor Philip Cowley, who's run these rebellion numbers, is 166. If the Prime Minister manages to lose by 10, 15, 20, 30, then they will regard that as a success. But you have to put that in context. This is a treaty, an international agreement that the government has been negotiating for 2 years. Frankly, a loss of anything is an epic failure, frankly, of political statecraft on the part of the Prime Minister. And you actually have to go back to put it in context, to 1864 to find when the government last lost.
Let's just pause a moment. The Speaker's just speaking.
F, as in F for Freddie, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Sir Mike Penning and Nigel Evans. Tellers for the noes, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart.
I should just say that the Speaker there running through some of the Commons formalities involved in all this. He's just named the tellers. These are the MPs who count the votes for the rest of the MPs. This is all part of the usual setup. When the division is between an amendment proposed by a backbencher and perhaps opposed by the government, then you have a set of government whips on one side and then supporters of whoever's proposing the amendment doing the counting for the other side. It's just one of the timeless rituals of the House of Commons, indeed a very long established ritual, Ruth.
It is, yes, and they will come back, line up before the table, before the Speaker, and they will announce the vote. And two from each side, and we'll have to see who are the MPs standing near the Speaker's the dispatch box of the opposition to figure out who's won.
Yeah, indeed, and that's how it works. You'll know who's won because the supporters of the winning side, as you see it in the pictures of the House of Commons, they will be on the left side of the dispatch box, nearest to the opposition benches. So the people standing nearest to the leader of the opposition are going to be the winning side. So if you see John Barron's supporters standing nearby, and most people think that's quite an unlikely contingency, standing right next to the opposition front bench, then you'll know that Mr. Barron's amendment has won the day and will be added added to the official government motion. His words are words that are added to the government motion. Basically, he's focusing on the big controversy that has dogged the Brexit agreement for some months now, this idea of a Northern Ireland backstop, a special mechanism that prevents a hard border being thrown up if Britain leaves the EU between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. That's been something that's been very controversial, because the implication of doing that is that Britain stays in a customs union when perhaps it doesn't want to be. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not that is something that the country could even tolerate. Sir Edward Lee, who had another amendment on this same issue, decided to pull his, not force it to a vote, after some reassurances from the Prime Minister from the front bench. But others have found it very difficult to swallow, and John Barron is, in a sense, carrying their standard. He's a highly influential backbencher, I should say. He was one of the very small handful of Conservatives who voted against the Iraq War, for example. So he's been standing against a number of tides throughout his entire career. Ruth, though, even an amendment that's a sort of sympathetic amendment may be difficult for the government to swallow.
Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, they have got to be able to ratify this agreement. And as things stand, if this amendment were to go through, the introduction of a unilateral right to revoke the Northern Ireland Irish backstop is something that, first of all, the EU would find very, very difficult to wear. And whilst the amendment is supportive of the withdrawal agreement, the fact that they want to add on a proviso to it may be something that the government can't legally accept. And
just interrupt you for a moment, just to point out something that's happening on your screens at the moment. You can see just at the bar of the House the white line running across right in the foreground of your picture, a wheelchair. I think that the person on that wheelchair is the Labour MP Tulip Siddiqui, who's delayed having her baby induced so that she could be present at this vote. The woman in the blue suit who was just talking to her is Andrea Leadsom, the leader of the House of Commons, and you can see a number of MPs sort of pausing to say supportive things and smile and talk to Tulip as she sits there. But that's just one of the sort of subplots that's been going around in these proceedings today. Well, let's get back to the issue of the backstop, because that's the thing that is now going to dog the government. The point you were making was that the government can't really accept anything that adds on to its official wording that might seem to undermine it when it's dealing with the European Union. And indeed the European Union, I suppose, might take the view that if Britain's saying it's going to bail out an agreement whenever Britain finds it inconvenient, then the agreement isn't as binding as they want it to be. Yeah, and this has been the European Union's argument all along. If you have a backstop, you can't time limit it, and you can't unilaterally revoke it. The backstop is there as the insurance policy, and the EU has been clear on that all along, and the British government in principle accepted the terms of that last December. And here we are tonight, the Conservative backbencher trying to insert that as a proviso for the House's support for the agreement. Yes, indeed. We're getting now rather fewer votes than perhaps we'd anticipated. This is the only amendment that's still live after that brief, rather sort of decorous little ceremony at the end of the debate there, but first Jeremy Corbyn for the Labour Party, then Ian Blackford for the Scottish National Party, and then Sir Edward Lee for his own backbench amendment, all declined to press their amendments to the vote. And you then have this rather bizarre ritual that they have in the House of Commons, where the Speaker tries to decide things on voices, and the respective sides of the argument shout as loudly as possible, and eventually, if it's clear that that no one's going to back down, in effect, the Speaker has to call a division, and so the MPs have to march physically through the two long lobbies, the aye lobby and the no lobby, that are on either side of the chamber, out of sight here at the moment.
Yes, and this is where it's interesting in terms of, you were mentioning Tulip Siddiq, the lady MP in the wheelchair. In our system, MPs actually have to be within the precincts of the Palace of Westminster in order to vote, and they have to go, unless there's an agreement between the whips, they have to go through the voting lobbies on either side of the chamber. So we don't here in Westminster have electronic voting. A few weeks ago to introduce that debate, and hence Tulip Siddiq has had to delay, as you say, having her baby to be here for this historic vote. Well, indeed, and of course Tulip Siddiq's situation follows on from an earlier controversy. In an earlier Brexit vote last autumn, the Liberal Democrat MP Jo Swinson, who was then pregnant, thought that she had an arrangement made with a Conservative MP.
This is another one of the Brexit rituals where the Speaker insists that the doors are locked. This is all part of the elaborate precautions the Commons has been running for centuries to make sure that no interloper intrudes in the debate. But Jo Swinson, the Liberal Democrat MP who was pregnant, thought she had a pair, that is someone who was going to stand out from the vote, so that her vote was in effect cancelled out. And then that pair wasn't honoured, and there were, whether you believe it was confusion or a deliberate deception, Jo Swinson was not very happy about it, and Tulip Siddiq is obviously taking no risks this time and has decided to attend in person on this occasion. Now we're still waiting here. These you can see a number of MPs popping through, emerging, I think, from the division lobbies. They will have registered their name, they will have given to the tellers in there who are Commons officials, and they will also have been noted by the MP tellers, because the MPs, as it were, keep a sort of backstop check, if I can use that word, on the voting proceedings. And they're the ones who come into the chamber perhaps in a few minutes' time now. And Jo Swinson, indeed, you can see now talking to Tulip Siddiq. Jo Swinson in the orange dress with the black jacket, now in conversation. I wonder if they're exchanging reminiscences here. But in a few minutes' time, the two sets of MP tellers will appear in front of the Commons table to deliver the result of this vote. And then very swiftly after that, we'll move on to the vote on the main motion. The Speaker will read out the result after having had it announced to him by the tellers. That will sort of read it into the record. And then we move on to the next phase, the big final vote on Theresa May's deal. A moment of absolutely epic political significance, Ruth Fox.
Yes, I mean, one of the great historic votes in the House of Commons. We all, of course, remember events in the chamber, great atmosphere, great historical occasions, so things like Margaret Thatcher's resignation, the Maastricht votes and so on, Geoffrey Howe's resignation speech. These are the great Commons moments we remember, and I suspect this will be one of them. However, if, as we predict, the government is going to lose its motion tonight, and as we predict, this amendment probably will not pass, although it's been going to be a great moment of parliamentary historic occasion, in the end we're probably not going to be an awful lot further forward in knowing what's going to happen in terms of the next steps.
You do get the impression that this is not going to be, even in the next few weeks, the last big Brexit vote. If this deal is defeated tonight, there will be more. There will be further debates, further votes, further controversy, and the interesting question is who the cast of characters will be. Will it still be Theresa May as Prime Minister continuing this? It looks very much as if that will be the case, but we will have to wait and see.
Yes, I mean this feels a bit like the sort of the phony war, and we probably face possibly a vote next week. We'll certainly have to have a government statement. We expect the Prime Minister tonight will say something. There'll be Prime Minister's questions tomorrow. The government is going to have to bring forward a statement in a few days, at the latest, saying what it's going to do. And if it doesn't win the vote tonight, then it's got to come forward and do something else, or try again. Put this motion in this form or in slightly amended form to the House again, and try and persuade more members. So a lot will depend upon the arithmetic. The alternative is, are there members in the House who can come up with something more creative to force a vote in some way, in a different way to this amendment process, to force the House to make some choices?
Well, that's the great question. At the moment, there seems that almost the growth is being forced of whole new Commons procedures to try and find a way out of the Brexit impasse that has dogged the House of Commons for months now. All sorts of exotic ideas about backbench bills suddenly going in ahead of government measures, which sounds very technical, but in the context of the House of Commons is an extraordinarily big and important innovation. All sorts of ideas like that are being debated. I suppose the first inkling we might get of what's afoot is what, if anything, the Prime Minister says in reaction to the vote. It's open to her to get up and say something immediately after the result is announced, as indeed it's open to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn today, in his speech, talked about wanting an early general election, but as far as I was able to hear, stopped short of saying that he was going to immediately move a vote of no confidence in the government if this vote was lost.
Yes, I mean, the problem Labour has got is that it probably, unless the Democratic Unionist Party from Northern Ireland, which has hitherto been propping up the Theresa May's government, unless they are prepared to vote with Labour on a no-confidence motion, they don't have the numbers to win that vote. So we're in a slightly frozen position. Now, the DUP have said they will continue to support Theresa May's government unless the withdrawal agreement goes through. Well, after tonight, if we're right and the government is not going to get the withdrawal agreement motion through, the DUP presumably will continue to support Theresa May's administration, and bringing forward a no-confidence motion will be sort of a form of rote procedure, and again another bit of political theatre. But he's not going to be able to force a general election in that way.
Yes, I mean, it comes to something when it is news that a government MP who voted for a motion of no confidence in the government of their party would then get deselected. But that was a line that was being put about last week. I mean, normally that would be a political given, but it was reinforced last week. A number of people sort of ostentatiously confirmed this point, and it would require a number of Conservative MPs to take what would look very much like an absolutely career-ending decision in order for the government to fall, unless, as you say, the Northern Ireland Democratic Unionists were to switch sides.
Yeah, and it's difficult to see how a general election is really going to fix this, because the problems are not just differences between Conservative and Labour, but differences within Conservative and Labour. And, can you imagine the difficulties of writing a manifesto to go into that election in terms of what is your position on Brexit? And they have not resolved their positions. You would have some MPs who would find it very difficult potentially to run on their party's manifestos, and we would face the prospect of a not a snap general election, because it takes 25 days from the dissolution of Parliament to hold the poll, but a fairly quick election to get something done before 29th of March, which is the day we're scheduled to leave the European Union at the moment. And it's difficult to see for local constituency parties. Some of them might be into the territory of wanting to deselect their MPs. People like Dominic Grieve, the Conservative MP, who's been at the heart of many of these procedural manoeuvres. Allegedly, his Conservative Association very unhappy with him.
Same with Nick Bowles, another Conservative MP who's been proposing all kinds of ideas on how to get out, although those are not the ideas that are being voted on tonight, but nonetheless he's going to be a big player in the coming days in the Commons in the aftermath of these votes. Incidentally, I should say that I can now see some of the tellers are starting to appear on our screen there. The man in the grey suit with his back to us in front of the table there is Sir Mike Penning, a Conservative former minister, I think, who's one of the tellers. The picture's slightly blurred. I think it is Mike Penning, and I think the woman in the skirt in front of the table there is Wendy Morton, who's a government whip. So I think two of them are there already. And we should hopefully therefore be seeing the vote in the not too distant future. The chamber is filling up again, which indicates that most MPs have now been through those voting lobbies and come back to see the result. So all we can do now, I suppose, is wait for it, while reflecting that in other parliaments all this is done in a trice, in a much less atmospheric way, by electronic voting. But they don't do that here, Ruth.
No, they don't. One of the reasons for that is that MPs like to be in the lobby, particularly with ministers. If ministers were not called to the House physically to vote, it'd be much more difficult for backbench MPs to have an opportunity to talk to them, to lobby them on the issues of concern, whether that's general national political issues or whether that's quite local constituency matters. And MPs are quite wedded to that. And there's been a lot of reluctance to abandon the procedure in favour of electronic voting.
Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom, the leader of the Commons, have just gone back into the government front bench there. Theresa May taking a quick sip of water as they wait. The two tellers are still positioned. The other the remaining two tellers haven't yet come to join them. There's a few more senior ministers file back into the chamber. I think I saw Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, there. But the trouble is it's a slightly distant picture, so you can't immediately see. There's Michael Gove, an instantly recognisable figure. I think he's joining the crowd facing the Speaker's chair, perhaps to get the best possible view. Oh no, just filing out altogether, in fact. And one of the things to watch out for here is the extent of the government defeat, if it is indeed a defeat on this amendment. I don't know whether it will be. The margins are going to be very closely scrutinised on all these votes. And the voting behaviour of individual MPs, I imagine there will be quite a lot of interest in anyone who's abstained as well. I think on balance, Ruth Fox, the government would expect to win this amendment, wouldn't it?
Yes, I would think so. Would be certainly what they would be hoping for. There has certainly not been any indications that there's a groundswell of support for this particular amendment. Attracted obviously enough support among signatories for the Speaker to select it, over and above some other options. But the government, I think, would certainly be anticipating not losing this one, winning this one.
Yes. In front of the Commons table now, Sir Mike Penning, one of those tellers, in conversation with the government chief whip. It all looks very amicable, so there doesn't seem to be a feeling of, building tension here. I think this may be a sort of going through the motions as expected sort of vote, where everybody really knows what's going to happen well in advance. Well, the tellers seem to be half gathering now. I think we're still waiting for at least one more of them to appear. A few hugs being exchanged, and it looks like the government whips Wendy Morton
Order!
And Ian Stewart.
Order!
Here's the result now.
The ayes to the right were 24.
Goodness sake.
The noes to the left were 600.
The ayes to the right, 24. The noes to the left, 600. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Thank you. One more heave. Order. I now put the main question to the House. The main question in the name of the Prime Minister. The question is the main motion in the name of the Prime Minister. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby!
And so we're now immediately pretty much into voting on the main motion as not amended by John Barron's Amendment F. That was lost by about as crushing a margin as I think I've ever seen in a Commons vote, 600 to 24, a majority of 576. Ooch.
Yes, I think you can call that pretty comprehensive. In fact, actually looking at that, it only attracted 10 more votes than the number of signatories when it went down on the order paper. So it's really not picked up much support at all. Interesting that a number of MPs perhaps not voted in that division. So 624, 650 MPs. If you take out the Speaker and Sinn Féin MPs, 7 of them who don't vote, then that all adds up to suggest that possibly a number of MPs did not participate.
I
possibly
suppose there might be some abstentions. There might be a couple of people who are unavoidably absent, ill.
Yes, yeah.
I know that there are said to be a couple of MPs whose health wasn't up to attending today. But I think you could also hear the irritation from some people in the Commons that they'd been required to go through this elaborate procedure when the vast majority of the House was so evidently against John Barron's amendment. So I think that there were a few snarls when such a landslide majority was announced.
Yes, I mean you could hear that, detect it in the House. Some frustration when the voice call was held. Clearly, the noes, I think, on the voice had it, and yet the Speaker still called the division. I think probably understandably, he just wanted to make sure on something as important as this. But yes, some MPs may have chosen to sit on their hands and not participate as well.
Yes, indeed. Well, now is the really big moment, though. This is the final vote on the Prime Minister's deal, at least in this round.
Is the main motion in the name of the Prime Minister. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes. Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Vicky Foxcroft and Nick Smith.
Yes, well, the announcement of the tellers there, those are the MPs who participate in the counting process. Much more straightforward this time. You don't have to find backbenchers to tell for a backbench amendment. And so we've got Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart on the Conservative side, and Vicky Foxcroft. And who's the second teller?
It was Nick Smith.
And Vicky Foxcroft and Nick Smith, both Labour frontbenchers. So that will clearly be a fairly straightforward clash now, presided over by the two-party machines, but with the other parties falling in beside their respective allies in all this. And I think it's pretty much the Conservatives' official line, plus everybody else in terms of other parties on the other side, minus a few Labour rebels. And this is going to be one of the really interesting things about this this vote. There was a lot of talk that some Labour MPs who supported Brexit or who were representing very pro-Brexit seats from the referendum might decide to back the Prime Minister's deal. A few of them announced their intention to do so in the course of the debate today. So it'll be interesting to see how many more there are. Are there some sort of submarine Brexiteers who are now going to have to surface and hoist their true colours?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the state of the parties in the House at the moment, the Conservatives have 317 MPs. So we'll be looking at how the numbers stack up against that figure. We'll have to be looking at when the voting results are published, how many the Brexiteers obviously opposed it. We'll also be looking to see how many on the Labour benches also decided to vote with the government motion. There were a few in the last week or so during the debate who've announced that they are thinking of doing so. Most recently, an eminent backbencher, Kevin Barron. So we'll have to look and see how what the swap, if you like, between the parties is. Interestingly, also be interesting to look at. There's 8 independent MPs at the moment. Quite a high number. Yes, and most of them predominantly Labour MPs who have either resigned or lost the whip for a variety of reasons. Some matters of principle, difficulties with their local constituency parties. Some of them have lost it as a result of misbehaviour or perceived misbehaviour, allegations of misbehaviour in the sexual harassment and bullying scandals that have beset Parliament in the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see whether they turn out and whether they vote and whether they follow the whip. And some of them have not been turning up in recent weeks, so we'll have to look at what those numbers look like.
Indeed, I suppose there's quite a complicated calculus because there are defections from the official party line on all sides. We've already mentioned that there are some Labour Brexiteers or Labour Brexit supporters who say that they may not have voted that way, but they now have to honour the result of the referendum. But equally on the Conservative side, you have a slightly unusual situation in a way, because there are people who are very, very pro-Brexit who don't like this Brexit deal that Theresa May has put together because it doesn't secure the objectives they wanted. And there are people who are pro-Remain, and both of them can at least agree that they don't want this deal, and so they can vote to reject this deal. Oh, there's even one former Liberal Democrat, Stephen Lloyd from the Eastbourne constituency, who isn't towing the Liberal Democrat party line on this and is saying he was likely to vote in favour of the deal.
Yes, and the Liberal Democrats, of course, are the most pro-Remain, pro-EU party in the House at the moment. They only have 11 MPs, so obviously losing one of your numbers when you're so small in number is a big loss. But as you say, we're seeing sort of alignments across party lines, which will make figuring out exactly who's voted which way until we see the actual published numbers quite difficult.
Yes, indeed. There's now a wonderful app provided by the Commons that gives you a full breakdown of the votes rather more rapidly than they used to emerge, but it'll still be quite a while after this vote is done before those facts and figures are actually available to us. In the meantime, though, the chamber's beginning to fill up again. You can see MPs beginning to return to their seats, and of course in the foreground, Tulip Siddiq, concealed at the moment behind the figure of the Labour MP Clive Lewis in her wheelchair there. Once again, having gone through the division lobbies, I think possibly almost first in the queue I would suspect. Meanwhile, as I say, the chamber filling up again. It's very difficult to guess what the numbers are voting either way, just from the way MPs file back in, because there are so many different routes in and out of the Commons chamber that you can't say, oh, if they're coming out of that door, they voted in a certain way. What you tend to watch for on these occasions is the faces of the respective sides. Unfortunately, the front benches are a little bit far away to judge that at the moment, but when we get closer pictures, perhaps we'll be able to see a bit of body language of triumph or defeat in due course. I don't think Theresa May has yet re-entered the chamber, although I think I can just about detect the head of the Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, on the government front bench there. And the leading Brexiteer, Sir John Redwood, just taking his seat in the back benches now. But I suppose the upshot of this vote is that the government and indeed the opposition parties will have a much clearer handle on how many of their MPs are prepared to break the party whip over Brexit, because Brexit runs so far across party lines. It's one of the real reasons why the Westminster system has found this so difficult to handle. The normal Labour versus Conservative alignments don't hold for the whole issue of leaving or staying in the European Union. Labour MPs represent very Brexity and very Remainy seats, and similarly on the Conservative side, and that means that there's a sort of automatic fissure running across the parties.
Yes, and ironically, the former Brexit Secretary, when he was in the Cabinet at the end of last year, he actually suggested to the House of Commons Procedure Committee that the government should change the amendment process so that they could get this clean vote on the government's motion. His proposals were not accepted as it happened, but in the end today, with the decision by the opposition and the SNP to withdraw their amendments and Edward Lee not to press his, we are getting that clean vote. So as you say, it means that Theresa May tonight and everybody else will know exactly what the level of support is for her deal. If the majority against it is not as big as many had thought, then she may well have another go. I think it will also be, the European Union will be looking at this and seeing, is this a Prime Minister that can get a deal through? Is the arithmetic working in her direction or not? And that will affect, I think, what they are thinking and what they may say in response if she wants to go back to Brussels for any concessions.
And of course Brussels will be watching this as well. Brussels will be making its own calculations about whether the Prime Minister will be able to get a deal through Parliament on the basis of the figures that will emerge from tonight's vote. So if not the world, certainly the European Commission will be watching closely tonight.
Yes, and the closer it is, if they think that this is a Prime Minister that can possibly get this through on a second go, they might be willing to make some concessions or to do something.
We're just hearing that Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the Commission, will be making a statement after the vote with no exact time yet, but it's presumed to be this evening.
Yes, and we'll have to see immediately after the results are announced. We would expect probably the Prime Minister to say something. It would be pretty extraordinary if she didn't, for her to just get up out of her chair, walk out of the chamber. We may or may not have a response from the Leader of the Opposition, depending upon what she says. I understand Jean-Claude Juncker has flown back from an earlier meeting to be in Brussels to make the statement tonight, and so he's changed his diary. And as you said, not just people here in the United Kingdom that are watching this, but all around the world.
Yes, indeed. And, well, the vote looks as if it's edging ever closer now. The chamber's almost filled right up again, but no sign yet of those tellers who'll be able to give the government the numbers on the vote, and will they be announcing it at the table, I imagine, fairly shortly.
Yeah, viewers might think it looks fairly chaotic. It's worth perhaps saying that every MP does not have their own seat in the chamber, unlike many other parliaments, legislatures around the world.
It's closer to 400 than the full 650, isn't it?
It is. So on big set-piece occasions like this, members, sit in the stairwells. They crowd round, as you can see, in the entrance to the chamber, waiting to hear the results. And it all looks slightly chaotic. And actually, the chamber is actually much smaller when you're physically in it. It's much smaller than many people anticipate.
Yes, and
so
you're
it's very
jammed
atmospheric.
in very, very tightly on those benches, like sardines in a tin.
It is, yeah.
And I don't think it will be very comfortable for very long, because even though it's a very lofty room, the chamber does get quite hot with all those people sitting in it for a prolonged period of time. Now I think that's Wendy Morton appearing again, the first sight of a teller.
She's walked past the table, so we're not clear what the situation might be.
The minor parties, incidentally, I suppose that's the slightly dismissive phrase that's used in Commons jargon. The minor parties, in this case, the Scottish Nationalists are the third biggest party in the House, and they're sitting immediately on the right of your picture, closer to as it were, closer to the viewer, further away from the Speaker, on the front couple of benches there. Behind them are the Liberal Democrats, the Green MP, Dr Caroline Lucas, the Northern Ireland Democratic Unionists, sort of mixed together in a slightly ad hoc way in the benches behind, with Labour MPs spreading out into the back benches behind that. Of course, the opposition is on the right-hand side benches of your picture. The government benches are on the left-hand side behind Theresa May and her cabinet ministers. So we can now see the tellers beginning to assemble in front of the table here, and the government tellers, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart, are sort of edging towards the government side of the chamber in a way that almost looks as if they're taking a position to announce that they've lost, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. As you can tell, the expectant hum. This is one of those big Commons occasions where the atmosphere becomes absolutely electric, partly because there are just so many people jammed in. It always produces a tension of its own.
Could also add, in terms of the seating, that in front of the Speaker, viewers will be able to see three people sat at a table. They are the clerks who advise the Speaker on procedure, engage with members about procedural matters. They keep check on time and so on. The most senior clerk, as we look at the picture, the most senior clerk is David Nartzler. He sits at the left-hand side, and then you have two other clerks.
And here we
go. Order.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes, order. The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. On a point of order. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Order. There's no good people shouting. There will be an opportunity for other points of order, but the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out briefly how the government intends to proceed. First, we need to confirm whether this government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the Government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition declined to do so, we will, on this occasion, consider making time tomorrow to debate any motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this Government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The Government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the Government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the Government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal, and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the Government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The Government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the Government to do just that.
I will come to other colleagues, but first of all, point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. She is only attempting to reach out now to try to keep her failed process and deal alive after it's been so roundly rejected by Parliament on behalf of the people of this country. Labour has laid out our priorities consistently. No deal must be taken off the table. A permanent customs union must be secured, and people's rights and protections must be guaranteed so they do not fall behind. At every turn, the Prime Minister has closed the door on dialogue. Businesses begged her to negotiate a comprehensive customs union. Trade union leaders pressed her for the same thing. They were ignored. In the last 2 years, she's only had one priority: the Conservative Party. Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
come to, first of all, just come to the leader. I will come to the right honourable gentleman, of course, but a point of order, the Leader of the House.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week.
I'm extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable lady, and I accept that she can't be psychic as to what I'm thinking, and I can't be psychic as to what she's thinking. I think the smooth and orderly way to proceed with this matter is to deal with points of order first, and then to come to the right honourable lady's statement, which would be entirely proper and doubtless helpful to the House. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, we should be aware of the situation that we're in. The clock is ticking. We have got very little time to resolve this. The fact that it has taken us so long to get to this point, frankly, is shameful. This is a humiliating defeat for the government. When I listen to the Prime Minister, it sounds like everybody else is at fault rather than her. She has to accept responsibility for what has happened this evening. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the Leader of the Opposition has come round to a motion of no confidence. This should have happened before, but of course we will support it. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, it is clear the clock is ticking. The government needs to secure the safety of all our nations and should immediately postpone the Article 50 process and should immediately have talks with all the leaders of the opposition parties. Let's work together in all our interests, but let's listen to the voices of the parliamentarians that have been sent here. There is no support for this deal. It mustn't come back again. The obvious thing to do, the right thing to do, suspend Article 50, put this to the people in a people's vote.
I know the right honourable gentleman won't take offence when I say he was using the device of a point of order, as is entirely understandable in these circumstances, to say what he wanted to say, but he was more interested in what he had to say to the House than in anything that I might have to say to him. It's not a matter for the Chair. The right honourable gentleman has registered his view, and these are the sorts of issues that can quite properly be aired in debate and quite conceivably in discussions that take place with the Prime Minister and other party leaders. But he's made his point with force and alacrity, and it's on the record for colleagues to study. I will take the honourable lady first, right honourable lady first, and then others. Point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With this result of a scale that is unprecedented in recent times, it is clear that this deal, nor any tweaks to it, will get through the House of Commons. So can I ask for your guidance, Mr. Speaker, on how Parliament can assert its authority to make sure that we can give the people of this country a say on this deal to resolve this matter? It is a mess that needs to be resolved by the people in a people's vote.
Well, my response to the honourable lady is as follows. First of all, there may well be an opportunity for her to air her own thoughts on that matter, the situation we face and the suggested way forward in the course of debate to which the Prime Minister in her point of order referred. There is that prospect potentially unfolding. So that's one opportunity for the honourable lady. And the second would be those discussions to take place in coming days. And I dare say that the honourable lady will want to take the chance to participate in those. More widely, where there is discussion about Parliament's role and what Parliament might do and what options Parliament might have, I think I can predict with complete confidence that the honourable lady will have a view about that, and that view, which is important, will be heard. And point of order, Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke about the will of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and I think we have to investigate that further. When can we test the will of this House on the choices that are now left? The choices are no deal versus revoking Article 50. Can we test these in the House? And bearing in mind, of course, that in Scotland, the European Union is more popular in the polls than the United Kingdom, and the Prime Minister should know that.
There'll be plenty of opportunity for testing in the days ahead. I think well, can I just take the honourable lady first? Point of order, Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a political point of order. Yesterday, it was raised the issue of the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, and the fact that she should have been undergoing a caesarean section today for a high-risk pregnancy, and she is comfortable with me saying she has gestational diabetes and was asked by her medical team to undergo that at an early possibility. She has had to defer that despite the advice and comments that you made from the chair yesterday that apparently were given no comfort from the government benches. And I think this is shocking. And I have to say that as a doctor, to put our colleague at risk and her baby at risk because we cannot have a method of allowing those who are sick or pregnant is disgraceful.
Well, I note what the honourable lady says, and I don't cavil at it at all. I made the point yesterday. I thought the situation was lamentable. I used that word, I think, several times. The situation was lamentable. This matter, I'm not interested in people chuntering from a sedentary position to no obvious benefit or purpose. I'm ruling on the matter and I require no assistance in the process of doing so. The situation was lamentable. I thought it better that the honourable lady should have the opportunity of a proxy vote. That was my view, and it was a view widely shared. The matter was debated in February of last year and in September. I had indicated my strong support. It would have been necessary for a resolution to be tabled by the Leader of the House for reasons which others can explain. It's not my job to do their explaining for them. That has not happened. I think it's regrettable, but it cannot be sorted tonight. Nevertheless, she's registered her concern. It's a concern and a sense, frankly, of very deep disappointment, to put it mildly, that I share, and it will doubtless be dealt with in days or weeks to come. And my very great sympathies go to the honourable lady, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, who, in my judgment, should not have been put in this position. Point of order, Yvette Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has now said that she will listen to voices from right across this House. She has obviously had 30 months in which to do that, and it has led to this defeat for the government tonight, which is the greatest for more than 100 years. We must all hope that she will indeed listen to voices from across the House, but we also all recognise that it will take time, and people and businesses and government organisations and institutions will now be worried that there are only just over 70 days left. The Prime Minister did not mention Article 50.
Order. People talk about respect in this House, but there's a Minister of the Crown shouting at the Right Honourable Member for Normanton. I say in the kindest way, he's normally a very genial fellow. Stop it. You're capable of much better than that. Yvette Cooper.
Given the scale of the challenge, with the clock now really ticking down, the Prime Minister did not mention what will happen to Article 50. Mr. Speaker, can you advise the House on what we might be able to do to urge the Prime Minister, for the sake of businesses and jobs and people across the country, to seek an immediate extension of Article 50 now so that this can be sorted out?
Well, the answer is, in the first instance, these are matters that can be aired in debate tomorrow. I don't think it's right for me tonight to give a ruling on what the Right Honourable Lady or others should or shouldn't do. She will be aware of the presentation of bill that took place in the name of another member who I believe also has views on these matters. These will be, I'm sure, discussed in the days ahead, not merely in private meetings, but I feel certain on the floor of the House. And of one thing I am sure, that which members wish to debate and which they determine shall be subject to a vote will be debated and voted upon. That seems to me so blindingly obvious that no sensible person would disagree with the proposition. If MPs want to debate a matter and to vote on it, that opportunity will, I'm sure, unfold in the period ahead. I think if there are no further points of order, and I don't think we need any, it is right that we hear the supplementary business statement by the Leader of the House.
I'm extraordinarily grateful, Mr. Speaker. With permission,
be honest. I don't really mind whether she's grateful or not, but she's got the chance. The Leader of the House.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week. Wednesday, the 16th of January, the House will be asked to consider a motion of no confidence in Her Majesty's Government under Section 2(4) of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act of 2011 in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. Thursday, the 17th of January, debate on a motion on mental health first aid in the workplace, followed by general debate on children's social care in England. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. I shall make a further business statement in the usual way on Thursday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Shadow Leader of the House, I remind the House that the supplementary business statement is subject to questioning, but its terms are comparatively narrow, and I implore members to recognise the implication and spirit of that fact. The Shadow Leader, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for the statement and say that the opposition concur with it in the circumstances of the vote. We agree with the debate tomorrow.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pete Wishart.
Could just wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether you could find any way to confirm that the whole day's business tomorrow will be given to the vote of no confidence. According to the legislation that's set out in the Fixed Term Parliament Act, there's only a requirement for an hour and a half. I'm looking to the Leader of the House just to confirm that the whole day will be available. The Chief Whip is shaking his head, so I am sufficiently persuaded that that's going to be the case. So he's nodding his head, rather, so I'm satisfied that that is the case, and the Leader of the House is just about to confirm that.
Yes, subject to the agreement of the House.
It would be useful to know the timings. I mean, ordinarily, the Chair is approached about these matters, which is the sensible way to deal with it, but we do need to know what the timing is, and I hope the Right Honourable Lady will either be able to advise now or to confer with colleagues later in the evening, so that there is clarity on that matter. And then we'll be all very satisfied. The Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that your office has the proposal for a business motion tomorrow that proposes that the debate takes place for the whole day until 7 p.m.
Grateful, thank you. Point of order, thank you very much indeed. Supplementary business motion, Wes Streeting.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't sure if we were taking questions on the business statement or points of order, but given the scale of the defeat, the government must surely have seen the inevitable coming. The issues for debate on Thursday are important, but every day wasted is another day closer to exit, particularly without a deal. Are we really debating two motions with no consequence on Thursday, rather than deciding how we're going to move forward on a crucial issue facing our country?
Well, the Leader can add to what she said by way of the supplementary business statement if she likes. That seemed to me, if the Honourable Gentleman will forgive me saying so, a kind of curious hybrid between an attempted point of order on the one hand and a question on the supplementary business motion on the other. And I'm not sure if he had to plump for one or the other, which it would be. But what I would say to the Honourable Gentleman is that these matters can be aired in debate tomorrow, in the business question on Thursday, and in subsequent days. So I completely understand that the Honourable Gentleman is seized of the importance of early progress, but that opportunity will unfold in days to come, and I think I can predict with confidence that he'll be in his place, ready to leap to his feet to share his point of view with the House. Yes, is it really going to be necessary? Yeah, Simon Orr.
Mr. Speaker, could you confirm that the timetable set out by my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, perfectly accords with the amended programme motion which the House voted upon last week, which I would guess that the honourable gentleman voted in favour of, which the Prime Minister would have 3 sitting days.
It wouldn't have been agreed if that weren't the case. I don't wish to be unkind to the Honourable Gentleman, but he's frankly not adding anything by that point of order, although I'm sure he perfectly well intended to do so, but no additional public service has been provided. If there are further questions to the Leader, I'm sure she'll be happy to take them within the confines of the supplementary business motion, but if not, I suggest to the House that we proceed to subsequent motions, namely, if memory serves me correctly, motion number 3 on energy conservation. The whip to move.
I'd like to move.
Oh, well, I'm sure the House wants to hear about the energy conservation motion. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The Order! The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 4 on exiting the European Union, brackets nuclear safeguards, close brackets. The whip to move, thank you. The question is as on the order paper in respect of motion 4. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 5 entitled Rating and Valuation.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 6.
The Speaker's going through a series of parliamentary formalities now, but Ruth Fox, a pretty historic moment there.
Very historic. I mean, 2 parliamentary records have gone there. The biggest government defeat and the biggest Conservative rebellion. So we know the withdrawal agreement isn't going to get through. Whether we will have a general election, we will know tomorrow. And that may at least start to thaw positions and unfreeze decision-making within the parties about what next.
Yes, indeed. I suppose we're moving from the slightly odd position where the government lost a motion by a margin of more than 200 just a few minutes ago to a confidence motion the government probably expects to win.
Yes, I mean, that's the great irony of this. The Prime Minister has called it in the expectation that she will win it and assert the confidence of the government. And all will depend upon what the DUP decide tomorrow.
Well, now moving in the Commons to the adjournment debate on train services in Chester Street. So it only remains for me to thank you, Ruth Fox, for joining us today, and to thank all our viewers and listeners in BBC Parliament and on C-SPAN in the United States.
And the surrounding areas who use the station are having. Tonight we've been